My name's nikimcglynn. I'm a neurodevelopment therapist. I thought I'd start doing live videos to answer any questions that you might have and talk a bit about neurodevelopment, and see if I can answer any specific questions, and to really just make people more aware of neurodevelopment therapy and how it can help. So I trained as a neurodevelopment therapist after trying to find something to help my daughter, who was diagnosed with dyslexia, a couple of other processing issues. So if you've been along to one of my talks, then you might find this a bit repetitive. So apologies, but if you haven't been along to one of my talks, then come along to one of my talks if you're local. But feel free to ask any questions. Anyway, so I trained as a neurodevelopment therapist because I wanted to find something to help my daughter. And I was really amazed at how simple and effective it is. And I've been a therapist since 2004. I qualified as a homeopath. And I've always worked with children with developmental issues as a homeopath. So it kind of fell in nicely with what I was already doing. I really love working with children, although it also works with adults as well. So particularly it's children who have processing disorders that it helps. So things like diagnosis of ADHD or autism, anxiety, dyslexia, dyspraxia. Like I said, I came looking for it for my daughter who had dyslexia. And I mainly use a system called Rhythmic movement training, which is absolute genius, and I love it. And it works really, really well because it's floor-based, and it uses rhythm. And we are rhythmic creatures. We all respond to rhythm. As soon as anybody plays a tune, people will tap along and jiggle along. So that we have an innate response to rhythm. And developmentally, the brain responds very well to rhythm. Inside the womb is a very noisy and rhythmic place, or it should be. Sometimes when the rhythms go off, when a pregnant woman is very anxious and her heart is erratic and her systems are erratic, then that can potentially cause a baby's developing brain not to develop to its optimum. So rhythmic movement training. Oh, morning, Sieta, and hello, Mum. My mum's watching. So rhythmic movement training really takes advantage of the rhythm that's involved in development, and it gives the brain another chance of developing using movement. The brain develops through movement, and we know now that the brain continues to develop right the way through life. So if things haven't worked quite as they should have, then using a movement program gives the brain another bite at the cherry, really. So rhythmic movement training is floor-based, it's rhythmic, it's simple, and you come along with your child and we do an assessment, or you come along as an adult, we do an assessment, and then I teach you the movements to go home and do at home with your child. And one of the jobs that we look to address is working with primitive reflexes. Now, primitive reflexes, if you're not familiar with them, are reflexes exactly the same as blinking is a reflex, that live in the central nervous system, and they assist development. So they help babies get moving, they help to feed, they help to roll over, to crawl, and eventually to walk. And we also have some reflexes that help to keep us safe. And sometimes those reflexes don't develop well, or they don't integrate back into the central nervous system well, and then that interferes with continual development. So what we do with rhythmic movement training is to move those reflexes along. So there's reflexes that sit in the neck, reflexes that are to do with head control, neck control, which then have a greater effect on the whole body. When you think that a baby's where a baby's body position is depends on where its head position is. So if a baby turns its head to the side, there's a reflex called the asymmetrical tonic neck reflex, don't worry about the names, that when a baby turns its head to the side, its arm extends and its leg extends and the other arm comes in, so we get this kind of movement led by the head. So if that movement remains in the central nervous system, then what happens is that every time the child or adult turns their head to the side, the impulse is to extend this arm and bring this arm in, which if you're trying to write, makes it very difficult to hold your pen because your arm wants to extend all the time. If you're trying to ride a bicycle and you look behind you, then this arm wants to extend, this arm wants to come in, and you fall off your bike. If you're driving a car, then it can make your car swerve. So if those reflexes get stuck, then that causes a problem. So by using a system like rhythmic movement training, it can help those reflexes integrate into the system, back into the central nervous system, and development can carry on as it should. So these reflexes can cause other developmental issues. So one of probably the most troublesome one that people have with their children is a reflex called the spinal galant reflex. And that lives either side of the base of the spine, and it has a job to do in birthing a baby. So as a baby comes down the birth canal, if pressure is applied to either side of the spine by the birth canal, then that causes the hip to push out to the side that the pressure's on. So it helps the baby kind of wriggle down. And once the baby's born, that reflex should pretty much go away. If it gets stuck, if it's retained in the system and it sits around the base of the spine, then that causes problems with attention and concentration and sitting still. So it makes children very wriggly. It causes lots of sensory issues, particularly with wearing tight clothes, around the waist. Oh, hello now. So it makes children intolerant of being able to wear tight clothes. Labels cause a problem. Being able to sit with your back against the back of a chair is difficult. Anything that puts pressure on the base of the spine becomes really uncomfortable, so children become really wriggly. It also interferes with some of the linking up within the brain. So there's an area within the limbic system in the brain called the basal ganglia, and if the spinal galant is still active, that part can't connect, and that is the part of the brain that allows you to sit still. So when you think how much a baby moves, how much a toddler moves, they're running around and climbing, and nobody bats an eyelid at the fact that they're constantly on the move, because that's what they're supposed to do. But there comes a point where they should settle and be able to sit down. Not really till the age of about 6 or 7. But if this reflex is still active, then that can't happen. So you have children who are absolutely doing their best to sit still and behave, and they just can't, because the part of the brain that allows that to happen isn't working. And in addition, this is also the reflex, your spinal galant reflex, is also the reflex that's associated with late bedwetting. Because of where it sits in the spine, it's linked to the bladder. So if you've got a child who's fast asleep and they turn over and the duvet or the bed covers or their nightie irritates that part of the back, then it causes the bladder to release. So you've then got children who will then bedwet until that reflex is integrated. It also stops children being able to listen well, because in utero the spine conducts sound up to the brain before the ears are fully developed. So if that reflex is still active, then as well as the ears trying to conduct sound into the brain, you've also got the spine trying to conduct sound into the brain, which can then become very confusing and very overwhelming. So if you've got children who you think have got hearing problems, and you get their hearing checked and there's nothing wrong with their hearing, then sometimes it can be an issue with their listening, and sometimes it's that reflex that causes a problem with their listening. So it's not a hearing problem, it's a listening problem, and it's because there's too much input and they can't filter it out, they can't cope with it. And similarly, children who struggle with loud noises, particularly loud noises behind them, sometimes that reflex can be the root of the problem. And particularly where you've got children who sit in the classroom and somebody drops a pen behind them, they're the children who always have to look, see what the noise is, because they're very distracted about what's going on behind them, because that reflex is in their back. So it causes lots and lots of problems. And as children get older and adults, instead of being wriggly, they tend to lock that area of the spine down so that it isn't wriggly, so that they can sit still, so that it's not uncomfortable. And then that causes problems, because instead of being a nice flexible part of the back, you've got a part of the back that is rigid. And because of where it is, you then have things like spastic colitis and other bowel problems, and similarly back problems. So where that part of the spine is locked, you've got an area of the back that doesn't move, so it can cause scoliosis when the spine deviates to the side, or general lower back pain. So I'm not saying that everybody's backache is a result of a retained spinal gland reflex, but it's a possibility. It can be something that causes a problem. So using rhythmic movements, you can help to integrate that reflex so that it stops being a problem. And then if that reflex is integrated and no longer a problem, then similarly the symptoms that go alongside it stop being so much of a problem. So that's probably the spinal gland is one of the biggest reflexes we work with. The other big reflexes we work with are the fear reflexes, and they're the two types of reflexes that I see most commonly in my clinic causing a problem. But the fear reflexes are a really, really big problem and quite complicated. So I think what I'll do is rather than add those on to today, I'll do a whole live on fear reflexes, because they have such a huge effect on our children and on adults as well. And in fact, if I have adults that come for neurodevelopment, they tend to come for anxiety issues, and anxiety issues are around the fear reflexes. So fear reflexes don't necessarily make you fearful, but they make you feel like you're not safe. So obviously it's a big subject. So I've rattled on. I'm not very good. I'm not very comfortable speaking in public. I thought this would be not like speaking in public, but actually it is. So I don't want to give out too much information on this broadcast, because I don't want it to be overwhelming. I want you to be able to feel that you can ask questions, and I don't bombard you with lots of stuff. But I'm really passionate about this, as you can probably tell. So I want to tell everybody as much as possible, as quickly as possible, because I'm really concerned about the fact that we have lots of children now who are struggling at school. I was in the school on Friday teaching hand massage to 300 children. So that was fun. It was really interesting, and I really enjoyed it, and I think on the whole they really enjoyed it. But it's a real eye-opener at how schools and teachers are really having to struggle with a lot of children nowadays with issues. My children now are grown up, so we're out of that. We're out of the school system for quite a while now, but particularly that primary age, that 5 to 11 primary age. And it is interesting to see now that there is definitely, or maybe it's just that particular school, but there's definitely an issue with the number of children who are struggling. And neurodevelopment it's not the only answer, but it's a simple way of being able to help address some of those problems. From a parent's perspective, other ways to address the problems is simply to keep your children moving and get your children moving. One of the reasons that we've ended up with children with so many problems is that we don't move anymore the way that we used to. So pregnant women don't move as much, babies are constrained in car seats, toddlers don't move as much, we give them phones and iPads and sit them in front of the television, and they don't run around and jump and climb as much as they used to, and it's that movement and that moving their whole body through space that allows their brain to develop, particularly their vestibular system. So vestibular system is your balance system that develops in utero, and if pregnant women don't move very much when they are pregnant, then that balance system doesn't establish itself well, and that's fundamental to every other part of development. It's the most important stage for development to everything else is built on. Knowing where you are in space, knowing if you're up, down. And because of how we live now societally, that doesn't really happen in quite the same way. Anxious mums, particularly, hold my hand up to that, who worry about our children climbing and hanging upside down and all those kind of things that we used to do. Those things all help to develop that vestibular system. So if we're not allowing our children to do that, then their fundamental balance isn't developing, which then interferes with everything else being able to develop. So any parents watching this, get your children outside, take them to the woods, let them climb trees, let them swing on monkey bars, let them swing upside down, let them hang upside down. Make them roll down hills. Rolling down hills. I live next to a park with a big hill. You never see kids rolling down hills anymore. We used to roll down hills all the time. And that's such an important part of allowing things to develop, and where children do things to make themselves dizzy. We say to them, I remember saying to my children, don't do that, you'll make yourself dizzy. But making yourself dizzy is really important. It's a really important part of allowing your brain to develop. So all these things that we used to do as kids that actually have a really big effect that we didn't realise, that I didn't realise. Certainly, things like nursery rhymes. So nursery rhymes all have a role in developing your reflex system and your proprioception, your awareness of your body in space. So things like round and round the garden, like a teddy bear, that helps your hand reflexes to develop. This little piggy went to market helps your foot reflexes to develop. And it helps a child to know where they are where their body is, where are my hands, where are my feet, where are my legs, where's my head, where's my top. If you don't know where your top is, you don't understand what top is generally, and then you have issues with understanding mathematical concepts. So it has broad range, and I'm often surprised at how many children don't know where their top is, where the bottom is, where their arms are, where their legs are, where their back is. When I'm doing assessments for children, I say, lie on your back. And part of that is to see if they know where their back is, and often children will lie on their front. You'll lie on your upper back. So all of these things have an impact. And as parents, we can make a difference developmentally. And if our children are now too old, we can encourage them still to do things. Your brain never stops developing. We know now neuroplasticity, which is your brain being able to make new connections, carries on all the way through life, which is why we now know that ballroom dancing is really good for people with dementia, because the rhythm and the repeated patterns helps to build those new neurological connections, whatever age you are. So ballroom dancing, things like Tai Chi, yoga, anything that has a repeated pattern, and then that social interaction as well makes a big difference. So we are social animals. So when you're relaxing and enjoying something, your brain makes connections much quicker than if you're doing something because you have to do it. So that, again, that's quite important when you're doing rhythmic movements, not exercises, is that children are reasonably happy to do them, because then they'll make a change much faster. If it's a battle, if they really don't want to do them, it's not a battle worth fighting, because the changes don't occur as easily or as well. So I feel like I've rattled on a bit today. Obviously this is the first one. So thank you everybody who's tuned in. If you've got any questions, if you're watching this afterwards, then do make comments, ask questions, and I'll happily try and answer them. If there's something you want to say or ask me, then and you don't want to ask publicly, then by all means send a private message, and I will endeavour to answer that. And if there's anything you'd particularly like me to talk about coming up, then please ask that, and we can maybe make a little schedule of things that we can talk about in the coming weeks. I'm based in Wokingham in Berkshire. If you'd like to come and have a chat about your own child, then I'm always happy to do that. I'm very passionate about trying to get the message out there that if you've got a child who's struggling, there is something that you can do more than just giving them pills. So I think that's probably it for today. So thank you very much for joining me, and I look forward to speaking to you again.